Mrs. Elisa Freeman.
Hello. Thank you very much for being here. We're thrilled that you're here with us for the largest Revista event ever. I'm very excited to introduce you to our next speaker. I think we're going to have some fun today. Spencer Levy is chairman of the Americas Research and senior economic advisor for CBRE, the largest commercial real estate firm in the world. Spencer is the chief spokesman on real estate matters for CBRE in the Americas. He is regularly quoted in major business publications and is frequently a guest on business television, including Bloomberg, CNBC, PBS, and Fox Business. He is widely considered one of the finest commentators in the entire commercial real estate industry. By leveraging his 23 years of experience in commercial real estate, including the past 11 at CBRE, Spencer has redefined the role of research leader. Spencer combines his experience as a lawyer, investment banker, and capital markets leader to create presentations that go deep and touch on all aspects of commercial real estate. Combined with his unique and engaging presenting style, this makes him one of the most respected commentators and advisors in the business. Spencer regularly speaks at major events of the country's leading commercial real estate organizations, including Cornet, NAIOP, ULI, ICSC, NAREIM, and CREW. He has also guest lectured at major universities, including his alma maters, Harvard and Cornell, in addition to Columbia, NYU, Johns Hopkins, Indiana, Georgetown, Pitt, Auburn, and many others. Spencer is a graduate of Harvard Law School and Cornell University. He's been married for 23 years and is a proud father of 3 children. Spencer sits on the board of directors of the Baltimore Leadership School for Young Women and the Harvard Alumni Real Estate Board. Spencer Levy, come on down.
Rod, who is about to join us? Bob, I believe it's going to be Spencer Levy. Come on down. You're the next contestant on The Price is Right. How you doing, Bob? Hello, Spencer. You are here. There's a pew of young men there. What? Is this a school in New York State?
Well, we're from Cornell University. We just graduated and we're driving around the country.
You have just graduated?
Yes, I have.
With a degree in what?
A degree in industrial and labor relations.
And now, do you have a job?
Well, I'm going on to Harvard Law School next fall.
Smart boy. Smart boy. As long as you stay in school, you're a success. All right, if you ever finish school, you're going to have to get a job.
I know.
Understand that?
I'm trying to avoid that.
So one degree after another. That's a great idea. It's a great way to go.
Good evening, everybody. Well, unfortunately, as you can tell, I ended up getting a job. And my job today is to talk with all of the good people here in West Palm Beach about what's going on in the world and how it applies to what we do here in real estate, specifically medical real estate. So these are the things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about geopolitics, what I call my 5 factors of awesome cities, the economy, and shareholders versus stakeholders. But to begin, you should know that I'm a little whimsical today because I'm turning 50 this year, and I was thinking about all these great things I learned in the 1970s, since I was born in 1970, both personally, about the economy, and about geopolitics, and how they apply to us here today. So why don't we start in the 1970s, shall we? Folks, I can go for hours. I got songs on everything. So in the 1970s, I had some of the great memories of my life. This is me fishing with my dad and my sister in Lake George, New York, and I caught a 5.5-pound, what I called loudmouth bass. And if you're a fisher person, you can see I'm holding this fish wrong because I'm holding it from the belly. You're supposed to put your finger inside the gills, but I was a little bit too squeamish at 7 years old. Well, what you might also notice is that 7-year-old had a pretty serious stare on his face, and I know that not just because of the picture, because I was actually voted the most serious kid in my 2nd grade class. I don't know why, but I was. But I think the reason why is because I always had a keen sense of what was going on geopolitically around the world, even from a very young age. I remember the issues between the United States and the USSR. And as a matter of fact, there was an instance once in my hometown of Harrison, New York, when there was an explosion of some sort. And I asked my mom, was that the big one? Because if you grew up in the 60s and the 70s, you were legitimately afraid of nuclear war. I remember the end of the Vietnam War, and I remember asking, how did the United States get involved in these endless wars that we can't win? I remember when we had a very unpopular president that people were trying to do harm to. Does anybody know who that is? Want to shout it out? Squeaky Fromme, for all those people who just saw the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. She was part of the Manson family, tried to kill President Ford. I remember the Iran hostage crisis, and I played a game of Trivial Pursuit once. And the question was, how long was the Iranian hostage crisis? And I said, 444 days. And I knew that because I was counting it down every day during the crisis. I remember the Ford Pinto, which many people say had a design flaw, which was the Ford Pinto itself. But there was a more serious design flaw about this car, because if you hit this vehicle from just the right angle from the back, the car would explode and kill everybody inside. Now, the scandal was that the manufacturer knew that, decided not to fix the car because they determined that the lawsuit settlement was cheaper than the recall. And the question that was asked in the 1970s is, has capitalism gone too far? And then, of course, I remember in 1979 when a blonde-haired rebel took over as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, trying to separate the UK from the European Union, and had other ideas that were considered crazy at the time. So let's recap here for a moment, shall we, folks? We had issues with Russia, endless wars, an unpopular president, issues with Iran, questioning whether capitalism has gone too far, and a blonde-haired rebel leading the UK out of the European Union. So I'll ask you one more time, what has changed since the 1970s? Nothing. We're still dealing with the same issues over and over again. And why do I frame my discussion like this today? So we're going to talk about real estate. And I think we haven't changed the way we look at commercial real estate since the 1970s. Everybody in this room that's a good underwriter of real estate buys an asset, does an underwriting for its exit, says, oh, on the exit, I'm going to add 50 or 100 basis points to my exit cap rate because I'm conservative. Well, you know what you did? If you did that for the last 7 years on any asset class in America, you were wrong. Because that underwriting standard was built in the 1970s when everybody was scared about inflation. Well, guess what? There ain't no more inflation. As a matter of fact, not only do I believe inflation is going to be lower for longer, I think it could be lower forever. And if that's the case, we need to change the way we underwrite real estate. But there are other changes afoot in real estate. We'll talk about those in a moment, but let's talk about geopolitics for just a minute. This is Admiral Yamamoto of the Japanese Imperial Navy. This is the guy who planned Pearl Harbor. He was also, until 3 weeks ago, the last sitting admiral or general that the United States assassinated. And about 3 weeks ago, if I was standing on this stage, everybody would have been very nervous that we were about to go into World War III with Iran. You know who wasn't worried about that? Me. Not because I didn't think we could have had a more serious military encounter. I just didn't think it was going to have any impact on our economy whatsoever, because we are no longer as dependent upon oil as we once were. And in the event the war got to be more serious, that actually has a boosting effect to GDP. Now, here's the thing, folks. I just wrote a blog which I published this morning, and it said, headline risk is a good thing. And why is that? Because people overreact to geopolitical events, and they overreact to U.S. political events. Kind of like this one. I'm not worried about this one either. I'm not worried about it for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't think President Trump's going to get removed from office, but you know, the bottom line is if you like President Trump, this actually made him stronger, because there's a couple of expressions I like. One is, that which does not kill me makes me stronger. The second one is, if you're going to take a shot at the king, you better kill him. And they didn't, made him stronger, and he's going to likely survive. But even if he doesn't, I'm not worried about this either. I'm not worried if we had a Democrat, whether it be Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, or dare I say it, Mike Pence, if the president does get impeached. Now let me be clear about one thing, folks. I've given thousands of speeches over the last few years, and only once did somebody walk out on me because they got offended. Pretty shocking, actually, given what I say up here. It was in St. Louis. It was in 2016, and I said the most controversial thing I've ever said. I said, whether it's Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, from a commercial real estate point of view, we're going to be just fine. And with that, somebody walked out. Well, now I'm going to double down because I'm going to do exactly the same thing here. Whether it's Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Mike Pence, or anybody else, from a commercial real estate point of view, we're going to be just fine. And why is that? It goes right back to what I said before. People over-underwrite geopolitical and U.S. federal risks, and they underwrite. They don't underwrite enough the risks of local issues. And how do I know this? Because we've been tracking this stuff for the last 50 years. And presidents have almost no impact on the overall growth trajectory of the economy. Now, what does have impact are local issues. I'll give you one example. There was just a change in affordable housing laws in New York City 2 months ago. The market has ground to a halt for sale of multifamily, and some people have suggested it may have knocked 25% off the value of multifamily buildings in Manhattan. One change in law, the biggest, most liquid market in the world. So local issues matter, federal issues not so much. So let me ask you a question again. Let's go back to this whole 1970s thing. If you were looking at real estate as an image and you had an alien from outer space out there, how would you describe what real estate looks like to them? I'll tell you what it looks like to me. It looks like my dad's 1975 Ford Gran Torino. And I look at this car and I ask myself, why was the color brown so popular in the 1970s? But also, I remember an advertisement for Oldsmobile from the 1970s. It said, we are the good olds guys. What does that mean? It means steady. It means long-term, stable. Because real estate is a steady Eddie kind of business. Well, I got bad news for all the good people here in West Palm Beach. I got into this business 23 years ago because I'm lazy. Like those Ron Popeil ads, I like to set it and forget it. But the whole business is changing now as everything's becoming a hotel. Hotel looks just like this, but this is actually CBRE's co-working offering called Hana. Looks just like the lobby here at the PGA National Resort. Looks kind of like the hotel I took from the airport over here. Looks just like the hotel I stay in somebody's apartment on the road. And yes, you could even now rent out your basement to your neighbor to rent their stuff there. Pretty creepy a little bit, but that's what's going on here. Everything's a hotel. Everything's becoming shorter term. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Well, let's touch on one aspect of it first, co-working. We came out with a report just prior to the failure of the WeWork IPO, which tried to estimate how much demand is there going to be for co-working space over the next 10 years. At the low end, we think it's going to go up to 6%, at the high end, 22%. But even at the low end of the scale, it's tripling in size because the size of the space today is about 2% of the industry. I've always been at the low end of the scale because I think we've overestimated, to some degree, demand for this type of offering. Now, it's still going to go up a lot, but not as high as that 22%. And I know this based upon a study that I wrote. I wrote a study 2 years ago called Millennial Myths, Live, Work, Play. And you know what the study's grand conclusion was? It said that millennials are just young human beings. And now they're not as young as they once were, that are different age cohorts, are having kids, they're making the same decision that everybody else made, including about workspace. And so I go to my clients up in Boston in the tech business, they can't hire millennials anymore because they all want flex work, be able to work from home and to work in the office, not necessarily in this environment. Now let's take a look at values for a second. You take a look at the values of all the major asset classes, you can see office and their doppelganger, medical office, which is what we're here to talk about today. Retail, data centers, multifamily, manufactured housing. With the exception of hotels, what do you see? You know what I see? I see that the cap rate for medical office and regular office is about the same. I see that the cap rate for manufactured housing, better known as trailer parks, is about the same as regular. Multifamily, what's happening here? Because I will tell you, I did a lot of medical office when I was a banker 20 years ago, right here in West Palm Beach. Did some banking with a company called Dasco. some banking with a company called the Rendina Companies. Anybody hear from these places? So, great companies. When I did these deals 20 years ago, that cap rate for medical office was 200 basis points higher than the cap rate for regular office. It was the same thing down the line. Now they've compressed. There is no difference. Why? Two reasons. Number one, the operational risk of base real estate, whether it be office or retail, has gone up. And the operational risk of these doppelgangers and these alternative asset classes has come down as we've seen more money come into the space, particularly private equity money, and they're teaming up with great operators. They're getting critical mass, so they're devaluing operational risk, which used to cause cap rates to be higher. When I say to be higher, these are the cap rates, in fact, for medical office, on campus, off campus, about the same of what you're seeing for regular office. But what's really interesting here is the off-campus side. If you took this all the way back, took it back to where I started this business 20 years ago, the delta between off-campus and on-campus was at another 100 basis points. But what's been changing because of technology, people are now fragmenting the medical office space, going out into the communities where people live, and off-campus is valued almost as much and sometimes higher than on-campus facilities. So, I just talked about a lot of scary changes in this opening segment. The scary changes about the macroeconomy with inflation ticking down, about how all real estate is now becoming operational. It's harder to do what you normally did and get the value for it for being a specialist. Talked about how you could no longer rely on long-term leases as much as you once did. So I got a question for each of you in this room. How do you navigate this crazy world? I'll tell you how you navigate it. You become top banana, just like the kid in this video.
Disappointed in him. Oh my God. How am I going to film this?
Where are they racing to?
Please, to God. Will is the banana. Oh no, Will, please don't win. Will, don't win the race. Please. Oh no, Will, come on. Will, stop running.
That was my 15-year-old son competing against a bunch of 8-year-olds at a fruit race at a minor league ball game. But that's how you compete. You be ruthless like my top banana kid. So we're going to shift now to what I call the 5 factors of awesome, of how I pick locations where I ask my investors to buy. And a lot of people say, oh yeah, you know, the good cities have always been good, and so I don't know why we're even going through this exercise. Well, let me tell you something. The good cities weren't always good. You go to Boston, which was one of my favorite cities in America, on all my factors. In the 1970s was a disaster. They lost their entire manufacturing base, and they had race riots associated with school busing. New York wasn't any better. They asked President Ford for a bailout when they went broke. What made Boston and New York 2 of the great cities of the world? Well, let's start with the theory of cities. The theory of cities is from these 2 guys. The guy on the right is Parag Khanna, wrote a book called Connectography, which says that unless you are in a mega city, and a mega city isn't New York, Boston, or DC, it is the entire corridor from Boston down to New York, down to DC, you'll never attract talent or capital in the 21st century. The other guy is E.F. Schumacher. He wrote a book in 1974 called Small is Beautiful. And what his book said is that small cities can compete because they're lower cost, they have family ties, which are hard to quantify but are extremely valuable, and because of technology that allows you to work remotely. So I'll ask you a question. Which one of these guys is right? I hate to be wishy-washy about this, folks, but they're both right, because they have Spencer's immodestly named 5 factors of awesome. Talent, foreign money, live, work, play, ease of doing business, and infrastructure. These are the factors I look at in every city around the world, in every asset type. You guys want me to go deep into medical office? I can, but I think it's important that you understand how I pick cities, because I buy markets. I don't necessarily buy an individual asset type within it, because these 5 factors matter most. Let's start with the most important factor, which is talent. Let's start with me here in Boston, Massachusetts. Standing in the Seaport, 12 million square feet of brand spanking new office buildings that they built because Boston is the #1 brain drain market in the United States. They create too much talent. They were leaving. Now, I'm not embarrassed to show you a picture of me in the Seaport in Boston, But now looking at the picture, I am embarrassed that you now know I own just one suit and tie. But the point is that talent is the most important factor of both creating that talent and attracting and retaining that talent. And since we're in the medical field, what is the number one area where we need talent? It's healthcare. Healthcare is going to be the fastest growing business in the United States, according to every fancy chart I could have showed you, even more than tech, even in big markets like New York City, like Manhattan, where we're seeing one of the biggest job drivers there is healthcare, and more condominium spaces being formed in Manhattan for large healthcare providers than anything else. But these are the cities where you're seeing popping up in every one of my charts. This is life sciences, but as very well could have been medical offices, very well could have been any other asset classes. These cities repeat themselves. Seattle, San Francisco, Raleigh, Dallas, Atlanta. I can give you 20 charts on 20 different types of real estate, and these markets will continue to repeat themselves because they are talent creators, talent drivers, which brings capital for all asset types. Now, speaking of capital, foreign money. I call foreign money one of my 5 pillars, and I was just in Europe last week. I'm going back to Europe again next week to solicit foreign money for my clients. Why? Because foreign money is fickle. They typically only like 24, 25 markets around the world, but if they pick your market, they give you the good housekeeping seal of approval, and they bring their friends. They move in packs even more than U.S. institutional investors. And they also bring diversity. They bring jobs. They bring everything. So if you have a market that brings foreign money, that's where you want to be. But here's the expression I use. Don't follow the money. Lead the money. Go to the markets where you think they're going to come or they haven't gone there in force. So where's the money going? A lot of the money goes to the big markets, the Bostons, the New Yorks, the DCs. Everybody knows that. But take a look at this chart on the left. Shows you where it's growing the fastest. Honolulu up 5,000% in foreign capital in the last couple of years. Seattle, Cincinnati, Salt Lake City, San Antonio. Smaller markets are now beginning to attract this capital. And what's important about these markets? Even though I believe cap rates are going to compress further across the board in the United States because of declining inflation, it's going to compress even faster in these smaller secondary markets. Now, when I look at markets, I look at it not just on a return basis, I look at it on a liquidity basis. Can you get in? Can you get out? Now, it's easy for me to say liquidity is overrated, but I am going to say liquidity is overrated. Why is liquidity overrated? Because if you go down to New York and you're getting a sub-5 yield, you're getting a tremendous amount of liquidity, but you can go up this chain and go to markets like Orlando, Tampa, Charlotte. Even here in West Palm Beach made my chart, and get a much higher yield and still get reasonable liquidity. People always say, well, which market should I buy? I say, well, it all depends upon the time horizon and the cost of your capital. But I like the markets right there in that cluster in the middle. What's interesting about that cluster in the middle? Most of these markets were on that list I just showed you a moment ago, and in every list I would show you, this same cluster shows up because they have great amounts of talent. They have great amounts of infrastructure, live, work, play, all the factors, the 5 factors of awesome that are going to be driving returns over the next several years. Live, work, play. Now, even though I think foreign money is really important, if I were to rank my 2 factors that are most important are talent and live, work, play. And what is one of the great live, work, play markets? Why, of course, it's Nashville, where I had 3 corporate gigs last year. Now, I show you this photograph because it is the only known photograph that shows me with a mustache. And I haven't yet showed it to my wife, but I have my sister-in-law sitting back there now. She's taking a picture, and the jig is up. What's special about Nashville? What's special about Austin? What's special about Portland, Oregon? They all have the same city slogan. Keep Austin weird. Keep Nashville weird. Keep Portland weird. What does that mean? It means they have been 3 of the top drivers of talent, attraction, and retention, but they haven't lost their local character. What does it mean to lose your local character? It means that when I was in Moscow a few months ago, I asked them for a Russian beer. They gave me a Budweiser. I was just in Miami at my office at 777 Brickell, and we used to have this little coffee shop downstairs. I get my Cafe Cubano and my Cafe Con Leche. I go there a couple days ago. They say, oh, we're under new ownership. We'll give you a latte. And I said, no, you won't. And I got an Uber, went to Little Havana, and I got my fix. The world is getting infected by generic hipsters. The key, and I go all over the world, is to maintain your local character, and you'll grow. I mean, this is actually not such a funny story, but I was in Madrid last week, and I was with some of my colleagues, and they told me that 20 years ago, he was actually a little embarrassed to be from Madrid. This is a true story. He said that every time I said I was from Madrid, somebody would bring up the bulls fighting and some other type of stereotypical Spanish thing. He says, you know what, I changed my mind now. I'm proud to be from here, and I like those local characteristics. And I agree with him. I was in Belfast last week. I had the same experience. You've got all of this awesome local stuff here. You have to accentuate it. Don't go generic hipster. Now, this is me in Helsinki a few months ago, and I'll be in Helsinki again next week. So there's an element to cool that's not just related to keeping it real. This building probably looks like to all of you Class C industrial. You know what it looks like to me? It looks like the best retail building I saw in Helsinki. You know what else this building looks like to me? It looks like the building that Wells Fargo just moved into in downtown Charlotte, out of a beautiful glass tower into something that looks like this. Looks like the buildings that they're building in the Fulton Market in Chicago. Looks like the buildings they're building right now in the Wynwood section of Miami. Looks like the buildings in the Arts District of LA. Folks, I can go on for hours because I'm like that Johnny Cash guy. I have literally been everywhere, man. This is the earmuffs moment for the medical office crowd in this room. You know what this building looks like to me? Looks like Class A office. Because you know what Class A office is? It's whatever it takes to get the best tenant into your market, and all of your assumptions about light and air and parking ratios and elevator times is wrong. The world is changing, and it's changing to look like this. Now, does anybody here in West Palm Beach know what market this is? Hint, snow on the ground. Anyone? Bueller? This is Moscow, which also looks like this, and we're seeing exactly the same trends as that's a water treatment plant about a mile from the Kremlin where they're building exactly the same kind of building. Ease of doing business. This is one of my four factor of awesome cities. And what does it mean? It means I've been spending a lot of time in Chicago recently, and I'm going to be there on Thursday because people are nervous because I had a change in political regime, regulations going up, taxes going up. A lot of people have redlined Chicago. You know who hasn't redlined Chicago? Me. Because those things that are at risk are underwritable and people are overreacting to them. And Chicago does so well on these other four factors of awesome that I'm recommending people go there. Now, on the ease of doing business, it's not your ranking that matters. It's your relative ranking. And Chicago can't be comped against Des Moines, Iowa next door. It's going to be comped against San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, markets like that. And based on a terrific Arizona State study that just came out in October, and I'm happy to give it to anybody who gives me their card. What is the hardest city in America to do business? San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles. The easiest one's Oklahoma City. But you know who comes in the number 2 easiest place in America to do business? Arlington, Virginia. And this is the case study on Amazon, which just moved into Crystal City, now known as National Landing, put 25,000 jobs in their HQ2. Why did they pick this market? Number 1, Arlington is ranked the number 2 easiest place in America to do business, and it's got Washington, D.C. right across the river, which is a very hard place to do business. They also have the best infrastructure of any market I've ever seen in the United States. They have the subway that goes from downtown Crystal City to downtown D.C., and what they say, they have red state pricing and blue state talent. They're taking the Amtrak train down from New York to connect it to New York. And then the best thing is you can put a walking bridge there, which they are building, so you could walk to the airport. Ease of doing business, great infrastructure, biggest deal that was done in the last couple of years. Infrastructure. Now, when I talk about infrastructure, which is my 5th factor, I need to bring in a special consultant to help me with this point. And that special consultant is my Grandma Bess. Now, why do I want to talk about my Grandma Bess? Number 1, I like talking about my Grandma Bess. Number 2, it brings up the key point about all of these 5 factors, and this has direct relationship for those people in this room who also do work in senior housing. So, about 5 or 6 years ago, I moved my grandmother out of her apartment in Rego Park, Queens, to an assisted living facility in Stamford, Connecticut. Why did I move her? I moved her because she lost. But what if I had to make that same decision today? You know what? I probably would have kept her in an apartment a couple of years longer. I would have let her age in place. What's my point here? My point is this. Every demographic factor in the world is suggesting we need more senior housing. Technology is pointing in the other direction of allowing people to stay in place not only because of transportation outside the home, but inside the home, which goes right to these 5 factors of awesome. You have to look at them collectively. You can't just pick and choose and take a good one and not so good one. Another one you need to think about technology, transportation technology, is self-driving cars. One of these things coming. Based upon a study we just did, we think about 15% of all vehicles on the road are going to be self-driving in about 10 years. But when you look at mega trends like this, you can't just say, oh yeah, that sounds about right. You have to look at local cultural factors. What do I mean by that? This is a good time for my Texas joke. So I was in Ireland about 6 months ago. I was also there last week, but about 6 months ago I was there and I played golf with a client of mine. And he wasn't very good. So I took some money off him on the golf course. And then I go to his house and he served me a beer. Miller Lite. I looked at him and I said, I thought all you Irish guys were good golfers and drank Guinness. And he looked at me and he says, I thought all you Americans had guns and pickup trucks. I then told that joke in Dallas and nobody got it. The point is that Texas is never giving up their cars. Ever. Driving culture. So when you take a look at these mega trends, you got to look at them together, but you have to take a look at the local cultural factors to figure out which ones of these apply. Another great study by University of Minnesota, ranking cities based upon who has the best and the worst infrastructure. To nobody's surprise, the best infrastructures in some of the big markets, mid-size, struggle a little bit with that. But I want to be clear about infrastructure. There's 2 types of infrastructure in transportation. There's intra-city and intercity. Intra-city, which this measures, is less important in my opinion than intercity, getting there from place A to place B on an airplane, because that is what attracts talent, that is what attracts foreign money. So these are my 5 factors of awesome. Talent, foreign money, live, work, play, ease of doing business, and infrastructure. Lightning round. Well, if we turn this mic on, please. You know, sometimes I get bored up here. I like to come out to the audience and ask you a couple of quick questions about what you just saw on the stage today. So we're going to play a little game here. You saw a lot of those photographs of me on stage in foreign cities and American cities with the big thumbs up. So we're going to play this game again. But we're going to play it, instead of showing me with the thumbs up, I'm just going to show you the meal I ate in that city. So are we ready to play here? What's your name, ma'am?
Lisa Freeman.
You having a good day?
I am, thank you.
Let's hope that continues. Okay, you ready? What city is this?
Dublin.
Good guess, but not correct. We're all among friends here today. That is Kansas City. Now, I got really bad news for all the good people here in West Palm Beach because you brought me in as the expert, but I'm really only an expert in 3 things. Coffee, airports, and steaks, and they're all relevant to this story. Now, I'll tell you why it's relevant to the story, because Kansas City has the worst airport in America. Take my words for it. It's so bad that you have to walk outside of the airport to get coffee. That's pretty bad. Now, they are putting a lot of money into it, and hopefully that changes. But what about steak? When I was a kid, my dad used to take me to all these fancy steak joints in New York when I was a very young man, and I knew that there was a distinction between a New York strip and a Kansas City strip. Anybody know what the distinction is? Kansas City strip's supposed to have a bone in it. I went to Kansas City and I ordered a Kansas City strip in a Kansas City restaurant. What's not on that picture?
A bone.
There is no bone in that picture. What happened to Kansas City is they became what I fear most, a generic hipster. They wanted to be too cool for school, and they lost their local characteristics, and they lost a piece of the city too. You need to maintain that local character. One more question here. What's your name, ma'am?
Libby Langendorfer.
You having a good day, Libby?
Great.
All right, Libby, this is a hometowner. We should get this one. What city is this?
Versailles.
Close. You know, it's like a trick question. Everybody always says it's Versailles. Last time I checked, the French temples didn't have a coffee shop in it. This is Versailles right here in Miami. And what is in that picture? That is the Cafe Con Leche and the Cafe Cubano that I bought because I couldn't get it in my office anymore. Because now, even downtown Miami, I'm Rickles becoming a little bit of a generic hipster. One more question and then we'll move on here. Planes, trains, and automobiles. We were talking all about infrastructure. What is the most important piece of infrastructure if you are a real estate developer? What's your name, ma'am?
Julie Johnson.
Hello, Julie. You having a good day today?
Yes.
All right, Julie, so there's a one-word answer. If you were a real estate developer, which one of these three pieces of infrastructure do you care about the most? Planes, trains, or automobiles?
Automobiles.
That's the wrong answer, Julie, but that's okay. No, it's actually a very good answer, and I agree with that answer. However, when we've done surveys, local developers like trains. They like trains back and forth, and I love the Bright Line, now the Virgin Rail that you got right here in West Palm Beach. Take it all the time because it allows you to turn West Palm, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami into one market and eventually up to Orlando. So it's a very important thing. But automobiles, very important. The economy. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in the economy, shall we? Let's start with the recently departed, my hero, Paul Volcker, Fed chair. Now, Paul Volcker, who was the Fed chair from 1979 to 1987, is a hero because he did this. He walked into Ronald Reagan's office in 1981, and he said, "Mr. President, congratulations, you just won the presidency. This is what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to raise interest rates to 15%, and I'm going to intentionally put the United States into a recession. What do you say?" President Reagan said yes. He broke the back of inflation, and it's been ticking down ever since. You know what was interesting about that? I was looking around the room. I was seeing a lot of younger folks. And every time I say 15%, I saw smoke coming out of their ears. They did not believe that you ever had interest rates that high. Now, we're all 29 years old in the room here today, but did anybody here have a home mortgage in the early 1980s? Keep your hands up. Who here had a double-digit mortgage in the early 1980s? You see that, folks? That's called reality. We're living in this dream world of low interest rates. And by the way, they're going to get lower. Because Alan Greenspan was on CNBC last week, and he said the 10-year Treasury, which was 1.65% this morning, could go to zero. Just to match where I was last week in Germany. Going down there, and Japan's been below that for many, many years. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? All these folks in the room say, oh, I got a student loan, I got a home loan, got a mortgage. That's a good thing. Low interest rates. Cheaper stuff. Well, that's bad news for you, folks. There ain't no free lunch. And if we have no growth, we can't pay for our 401k accounts. Because that is the only thing that can create cash. Now, some people say growth is overrated. I have all this free time. My employer's talking about a 3-day work week. I'm happy. Well, I like puppy dogs and rainbows too. But I like growth when it comes to the things that matter. Let's talk about growth. Now, you probably have figured out I am not the fancy chart guy. This is my last fancy chart of the day, if I had any ones to begin with. This is our growth forecast for the next several years. And you'll see that we're going to continue to grow, albeit at a slower rate this year and next, around just under 2%. And the reason for that is we have no inflation. We have very low interest rates. And by the way, you should know that I disagree with the tail end of my own forecast. I've been fighting with my colleagues. I think that inflation in 2023 is going to be lower than that because we have these mega forces that are keeping down inflation. What are these mega forces? Too much cheap money, too much cheap energy, too much cheap labor, and innovation itself squashes inflation because stuff is cheaper. So what do you call an economy like this? Reminds me of a story in 1978 when Jimmy Carter's head of his Council of Economic Advisors, Alfred Kahn, a good Cornell, my alma mater, professor, had to testify in front of Congress and tell them what's going on with the economy. Now, before he testified in front of Congress, President Carter went to Professor Kahn and said, Professor Kahn, the one word you could not say in front of Congress is recession. Professor Kahn looks at him. He says, well, that's like telling a meteorologist I can't say the sky is blue. He said, no, you could not say the word recession. Okay. So he goes in front of Congress the next day, and when asked by a congressperson, what's going to happen to the U.S. economy in the event that we see the rising price of oil, increased unemployment, he said, well, that's easy. We're going to enter into a banana. And this banana could last for a long time. It could be as bad as the Great Depression. He then used the word banana 11 more times in his testimony in front of Congress. He was fired the next day. But that's what we're entering into, a banana period, because I don't know what to call an economy that has no recession in it whatsoever. So the last point I want to make today is about stakeholders versus shareholders. And what does this mean? It means that the Business Roundtable came out with an announcement about 3 months ago, changing the primary function of a corporation, not just to care about maximizing shareholder value, which is economics 101, but caring about stakeholders, caring about broader things, caring about the environment, caring about diversity, caring about things that companies traditionally didn't want to deal with. Now, this doesn't sound like that controversial of a statement, does it, Joe? Let's care about not just the company, let's care about others, right? It was very controversial. The Wall Street Journal's op-ed page came out completely against this. All classically trained economists were against this, including, dare I say it, Warren Buffett, who actually in his companies does not give to charity. He just does it individually. He does not think that's the purpose of a corporation. But I liked it, and I think it is something that we should be doing more of. And how do we do this, right? There's a lot of things in our business that we can take care of this issue through. Affordable housing is one issue that's important for commercial real estate developers to think about. But another one that may not come first to mind is what are the amenities that we put in our office buildings? I know medical office buildings are not quite the same as suburban, but you still have to think about how much you're going to amenitize the space. And when we ask our Fortune 500 clients what amenities they want, these are them. There's no surprises up here. They want to have coffee and bike racks. And the number one amenity of all is full-service cafeterias. Well, did anybody see what San Francisco did about 18 months ago? They tried to ban the construction of new cafeterias in the workplace. Can they do that? Why would they do that? They did that because people are building these fortress-style office buildings where people are walking in the door in the morning and not walking out again until at night, and they're not interacting with the local stakeholders. Who learned that lesson? Amazon. You recall they picked two HQ2s. One was in Long Island City, New York. The second one was the case study I just showed you in Arlington, Virginia. They got run out of town on a rail in Long Island City because they didn't understand what the local stakeholders wanted, and they learned their lesson in Arlington. Because JBG Smith, their developer, who I do a lot of work with, is building 6 million square feet for them. You know what they're not building a lot of? Cafeterias. They want the people to go out and interact with the local stakeholder. Okay, so let's conclude this now. And I just want to say that the 1970s were a terrific period for me, learning so much about life and the economy and geopolitics. A lot of puppy dogs and rainbows, but I will tell you, it wasn't all puppy dogs and rainbows for me.
Birds suddenly appear every time.
That's the time my grandmother made me dance with her to Close to You by the Carpenters at my bar mitzvah. It was not my best memory. So what do I tell my clients to do in this low-growth environment? I go to the places that have the most growth. From a geopolitical perspective, I say go to the United States and the United Kingdom. Folks, I fight with my colleagues every day, and the two biggest fights I've had have been about, is Trump going to take the economy down, or Boris Johnson and the Brexit going to take the UK down? I said no, no, and no. And for one very simple reason. The United States and the United Kingdom are the two cleanest dirty shirts in the global investment laundry. And you're going to continue to see an outsized amount of capital and talent going to these markets, no matter who's at the top of the ticket, whether you like them or not. In fact, one of the upsides, if there's such a thing to the situation going on in Hong Kong for the last several months, we've been seeing a flood of capital and a flood of occupiers going back into, yes, Brexit, London. As a matter of fact, we did more trades in London in the last 6 days of 2019 than we did for the prior remainder of the year combined. Why? Brexit risk off the table. UK is looking pretty good. Now, what about here in the United States? Two basic strategies I'm advising my clients. One, for those people who have more opportunistic capital, go to smaller markets and get higher returns. Pretty basic math, right? You got to move up the risk spectrum. But here's the key. The key is, this is what I'm telling all of my institutional clients and foreign clients. Do that. Go back into core markets. Why? Because I do believe in the Parag Khanna megacity theory, and I also believe that because inflation is not just lower for longer, but will be lower forever, we're going to see another tick down in cap rates in the United States to match cap rates in Europe, which are traditionally 100 basis points lower than here in the U.S.
They will have a spin-off unless the mighty Spencer beats them both. And the way to beat them, Spencer, is to get that $1. Spencer needs that $1 to wind this thing up. And Spencer has a dime. Do it again, Spencer. Here's Spencer's second spin. He got 10 cents in his first spin. He must beat 95 cents or at least tie it in order to stay in the game. Not quite. Good luck to you, Spencer.
No, how many times I see that, I always hope for a different outcome. Thank you very much. I believe I have time for one or two questions, and I'll take as many as you want when I get off stage. Any questions while I'm still standing up here? Oh, yes, sir. What's your name, sir? Yes, hey. Yes. Well, the argument's called Japanification, and I have argued for that, certainly in Europe, where we're going to see lower and lower interest rates because you have these mega forces, primarily demographics, where they have no birth rate and they have no immigration. And so because of that, even if you have fiscally stimulative policies or monetarily stimulus policies, you're not going to be able to find ways to grow. And if you can't grow, you have low inflation, you have low interest rates. So yes, that is a scenario absent something that's going to bend the curve, that's going to have us grow faster. Demographics is the best one of all. But the other thing, the elephant that's sitting in the corner of that room right now has a fancy word. The fancy word is called productivity. And what's been happening in the United States, and there was an article on this in today's Financial Times, is that productivity, which is output per hour worked in the United States, has been slowing its growth and has actually gone negative. Notwithstanding how people in this room believe they're individually being more productive because of their cell phones and their computers, we're just not productive enough. But there are some things that can boost productivity. One of them is more infrastructure spending, but it has to be good infrastructure, not bridges to nowhere. The other is more R&D, but the most important one of all is demographics. People have to have more kids. Now, let's go back to the Japan scenario, because that's absolutely the most relevant thing to the people in this room, because we can't avoid the aging population, and the average American spends 3/4 of their lifetime healthcare spend after the age of 65, and we're going to see a lot more of them. So because of that, what is the number one growth industry in America? It's healthcare. So even in a slowing growth environment, you could still find terrific pockets of places to make money in real estate. The expression I use is that I am a macro pessimist. I'm not hiding the ball. I think we're going to grow slower. I think we're going to have lower inflation, but I'm a micro optimist because I believe in the areas that have these 5 factors of awesome and things like healthcare, you can see great returns even in a slow growth macro environment. Yes, ma'am. Hello, Carol. Well, I'm going to go back to my favorite chart. Demographics point this way, technology points this way. Okay, so the risk factor is that technology disrupts what is the obvious path for the need for more medical office, the need for more biomedical engineering, the need for more senior housing. That is the risk factor. And I say this point blank. There is no more inefficient industry in America than healthcare. And because of that, it's ripe for disruption. And so ripe for disruption means a lot of things. One is healthcare records. The second is with respect to how healthcare is provided. We've already seen the fracturing of the medical office building model where it's moved closer into the communities where older folks live rather than forcing people to come onto hospital campuses. The question is, are you going to need less demand for people to physically walk into that space because of some of these other disruptions? What happens if we start to have doctors that can talk to you in your house in a way that it's as seamless as talking to a doctor in the office? That's already happened to x-ray technicians, right? That may have just been the first shot. So the risk factor is that, notwithstanding all the positive factors demographically that point for more healthcare, is that it gets disrupted hard by technology. Now, because of HIPAA and other laws, I don't see that happening anytime soon. And healthcare provision can be done in an office and at the home. But ultimately, for people here who primarily are leasing space to doctors and medical office buildings, that's the risk factor. One more question, I'll take more off stage. Yes, sir, what's your name? I see an intersection of all real estate. I'm writing a report right now called Real Estate 2030, and they ask what's my favorite real estate asset class over the next 10 years, and it's going to be, and it's all of the above in the same cluster. And the clusters, we're seeing that all over the place, not only because of we're putting traditional medical office into traditional malls, we're putting regular office into malls. My office that's in San Diego, we just moved out of a suburban building, and our office is now on the second floor of a Westfield mall. And I can show you all these other places where we've done new developments where we put multifamily on pads outside of retail. But I think that is absolutely going to happen. You're going to see the merger of the two. But the real risk factor here goes right back to what I was talking about before with the gentleman over there from JLL, which is labor shortages. Is anybody here that's in the senior housing side of the business? They will tell you they love it, but the labor problem is acute right now. There's not enough of it, and it costs too much money. So I agree with you that from a 5 factors of awesome, a live, work, play, put everything in one place perspective makes all the sense in the world, but we have to find a way to solve that labor problem because the profitability of senior housing is at risk. Out of time. Anything else? Final words? Thank you very much. I'll take questions off stage.